Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at Unveiled. My name is Jamie Sanderson Reed from the Communications and Outreach Advisory Council. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to enabling equitable access through bold conversations, tangible action, and a community committed to transforming systems. By reimagining access, opportunity, and sponsorship, we're building a world where access to opportunities isn't reserved for a lucky few. Our fireside chats are safe, bold spaces where we have real conversations with change makers who are challenging the status quo, leading with purpose, and showing what's possible. As you listen, we invite you to join the movement, engage with us through our comments here in the chat, on our LinkedIn post, and our monthly newsletter on our website, unveiledbridgingthegap.org/blog. Become a member of our growing network at any of our 4 membership tiers and support our mission with a donation to ensure that we can continue offering programming and events like these that meet the needs of our community. We also today have 2 exciting highlights that I'd like to share. Applications are open for Press Pause. It isn't just another leadership program. It's a 6-month guided experience created for professionals who know that there's more to their story. It's a space to step away from autopilot, reflect on what truly matters, and build confidence and purpose. You can apply today at unveiledbridgingthegap.org/press pause. And the second update is that we have an in-person gathering of leaders across industries on October 15th in New York City, where we will celebrate 3 years of success activating equitable access to opportunities, share how we are amplifying our impact to meet the needs of our communities, and reveal the name of our first book, which promises to be the playbook to navigate workplaces for success. And you can get your tickets today before they're gone at unveiledbridgingthegap.org/book. And I am so excited. Today we are here to have our fireside chat with Selena about the power of giving back. And I'd like to give you a background for Selena. Selena LaCroix is Vice President of Korn Ferry's Global Technology Practice and a seasoned board member and executive with more than 25 years in the semiconductor and technology sectors. Known for her people-first leadership and expertise in guiding CEOs, boards, and executive teams, Selena has also pioneered growth platforms in AI, cybersecurity, and blockchain. She is passionate about helping organizations build world-class leadership and fostering meaningful impact through giving back. Welcome, everyone. Well, thank you again for joining us today, Selena. We're so excited to have you. My first question for you is really getting back to the title of today's chat, the power of giving back, and what does that mean to you? And what was the inflection point in your career where you started to define success in terms of legacy and impact rather than just titles and transactions or money?
Well, firstly, thank you, Sahana and Jamie for inviting me to give this, to be at this fireside chat. Like Jamie says, this is pretty informal, and hopefully, I can be a resource and answer questions as we go along the chat. And so I don't want to make it sort of a one-way traffic. But coming to your question, I would say that, I started my career as a lawyer, and, growing up in Singapore and being if you know Singapore as a country, it's a very highly disciplined and linear thinking country. And I would say that my first 20 years of practicing the law, both locally, initially in Singapore, and then moving to the US, which was a big change to move across the ocean and practice law in the US, and then going into a corporate setting after initially working in a big law firm. I worked for many, many years at Texas Instruments and Honeywell. And those first 20 years of practicing the law, I would say, was frankly more about taking that linear career path. What is my next promotion? What's the next title? Because that's kind of what you were trained to do, right? What's the next best role for you? And so I would say that I was really quite clueless about, sort of taking a broader view of the world until I actually made a pivot in my career. And that was also a very unique pivot that I didn't expect to take. But I landed in the world of executive recruiting and talent advisory. I was recruited by a firm that was, very much interested in my background, both as a lawyer and someone that's very deep in the world of technology and semiconductor in particular. And they wanted to encourage me to join the firm and focus on building great leaders. So at that time, it really resonated with me because as I started going up in my career and moving up that corporate ladder, I realized that one of the most important things that defines the success and failure of a company or a department was whether there was a good leader. As a lawyer, they never really trained us to be good leaders. It was always important to be a great lawyer, but leadership seemed like a secondary topic. But going into this new world where my role was to identify great leaders to help, my clients build out great leadership teams, I started realizing, how building strong leaders at all levels is a very, very important mission. And frankly, that started me kind of, hitting that inflection point to your point, Jamie, where I realized that if I could help, young leaders or even older leaders, wherever they are in their career, become better leaders or people managers, I think I've hopefully created an impact because good leaders lead to great organization. And that sort of really flows down to the entire organization. And I started getting, I would say, very passionate about giving back in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Because, in the intro, I focused a lot on your tech background, but it's interesting that you had a whole career as a lawyer that you started with before pivoting. Um, so what you were sharing kind of leads to my next question as well, in terms of after making that pivot. I mean, during this time, since you started out as a lawyer, you've had a career in many different industries, continents, and different roles, general counsel, and also the global tech practice vice chair. So, and it sounds like that along this time, you've really developed a focus on people, regardless of what you were doing. And how have you ensured that giving back remains a core actionable tenet of your leadership and not just an idea, especially when under intense business pressure? Because I'm sure some of your businesses that you've been a part of have faced, challenges, whether it's been funding or, tight deadlines.
So I think it's just sort of making it sort of part of that pay it forward mindset. I think it's important to just make it I would just say make mentoring or helping to groom leaders or providing feedback to your friends, colleagues, make that part of your day-to-day mantra, I would say, right? It's a mindset that you cultivate. One of the things that I did that I would say is more of a true program and action was the first group I wanted to give back to was Asian lawyers. So I grew up in this as an Asian lawyer coming to the US and, being for the first time a minority. In Singapore, I didn't even have that thought. I was just in the majority group and we were a much blended society anyway, and there was not a lot of talk about DE&I. And the one group I wanted to first give back to is it's the Asia Pacific Bar Association. So I co-founded together with some general counsels and senior law firm partners a group we call the Pipeliners. So this is a group that helps groom future general counsels from these Asian legal bar association. So, over time, we very meticulously, and these general counsels that are part of our organization, help pay it forward to the next generation by help coaching them as to what makes a great general counsel. And where I was able to contribute was that I was talking to CEOs and board members every day. And I was, in fact, working on searches for these next general counsels. I realized, how important what they thought great looked like and help transmit that to this new growing group of leaders. I think that was something that I completely missed during the time I was an attorney. No one told me, hey, Selena, this is what we're looking for in a great general counsel. We just kind of worked our way through it. And so just by making sure that these young next generation leaders were really being coached, mentored, and guided along the way has created a great movement. So we had a goal of increasing these APA general counsels in the Fortune 500, just using like one level of a data point. And we're very proud to say that over the last 10 years, this group has grown 133%. And it's made the biggest leap, I would say, amongst all the other minority bar associations, including the Hispanic and the Black bar associations. We've made the biggest growth. And what it tells me, and it should tell all of us on this call too, is that there's a huge power in helping that next generation. And no matter where you are in the organization, you could be a mid-level leader today or a senior level leader. There's always a group below you that you can help groom and pull up. And I'd like to leave you with that.
Thank you. That's powerful. There's a lot in there. We don't even have time to unpack it all, but I could relate to a lot of what you said, because even though I grew up here in the US, I lived outside of the US for about 16 years. I was mentioning that to you, and coming back, even though I was an older, like I was in my 30s when I came back, but it was a bit of a shock for me. Like it was a huge adjustment. And so I think that whether you grew up here or whether you grow up in another country and, work here, or, this is a global world that we live in. So there's going to be a lot of people moving around, and it's just being aware and supporting each other, like you said, and understanding the challenges and young people in general, but all of us have these different transitions that we're going through, and mentorship makes a huge difference. So I appreciate that. One of the things you mentioned is being able to share with the next generation what great looks like. And I mean, that I wish I had someone to tell me that when I was younger, because like figuring it out on your own is it's a lot of failures and lessons learned that help you to get to that perspective. So I wanted to ask you, as a seasoned director, and in your experience guiding CEOs and executive teams, I'd like to hear more about what great looks like, and also what some of the common blind spots or mistakes that you see, and especially from successful leaders when it comes to adopting a people first approach. But then if it's okay to broaden it a little bit, and then to like those people that you mentor, in terms of getting a better perspective of what great looks like, what kind of advice do you give to the people that you work with?
And to your point, I've been very fortunate to be sitting on a board where, I'm sort of working with my CEO and also some of the senior executives in the team, but also in my everyday role, recruiting at board levels and working with senior executive teams. One thing I want to express to the audience here is that even at the level that they are at, where you and I would look at them and say, boy, they are so successful, they've reached the top of their game. Let me tell you, they still have things that they need to work on. Okay, so they still struggle with their own confidence. They still struggle with whether or not they can do certain things. They also struggle with the world that is around us. This world is so dynamic, right? It's constantly changing. So even if you say, hey, I'm an expert, you know, an expert CIO, Chief Information Officer. Well, guess what? Now with, between, AI and cyber threats, you're constantly trying to figure out, well, how do I attend to all those issues? So that dynamic moving world, I think, still creates a lot of uncertainty, even in leaders that we feel like have made it. What we need to keep understanding is that it's very important as we look at what great looks like. It's not just sort of what you've done on your resume that is, let's say, your technical skills, right? So if you're a good lawyer, you could be a good marketing leader, a good HR leader, or you could be a good IT leader or a top engineer in the semiconductor field. What defines a great leader goes beyond that. What defines a great leader goes beyond the hard skills. And okay, this might be an often used term, but are also the soft skills, right? The soft skills are really what, when I assess a leader, I look for. And this comes in many facets, right? When you talk about leadership with a purpose, that's a soft skill. Someone who thinks beyond just like, I'm going to make money for my business. Okay, we understand that. And of course, that's an important part. But what is the larger purpose or the mission of your organization? Authenticity is another big topic, right? Like a leader who can lead authentically, who's not just a robot, right? And sometimes be able to share things that are more personal and make you more human, right? That's an important part. The dynamic workplace requires someone who is a constant learner, who constantly feels like there's more they need to learn and do. Someone who is agile, who is able to flex in a crisis, in new circumstances. These are all really, really important skills that don't appear on your resume per se, right? But they are skills that you need to cultivate and grow, because that makes the difference in the experience and technical skills versus this other set of skills that make you a truly good to great leader. So I would say that's the differentiating point.
I know for me, one of the things that I struggled with especially when I first came back to the US, was that authenticity piece, because that was the first time that I heard about that, and it was difficult because I always felt like you had to have this perfect persona for work, and I was like, how can you be authentic? But if you're not, people can sense that, and it's just something underneath, and they don't want to really work with you or trust you if you don't come across as authentic. So I think that and that all of those soft skills are really important factors. And now the technical hard skills are important too. And so in these kinds of organizations where it's like you said, dynamic, the rules are constantly changing, and there's so much disruption. Building on those soft skills, how do you instill confidence and that sense of purpose amidst rapid change?
And that's sort of probably a harder, sort of topic, I would say, because those, technological trends and movements and, some are really, can be more trendy, others are more sustainable. And so what we try and look at in our world is what is coming next, right? Like, when I founded, the cyber practice and the blockchain and the AI practice, that was frankly about 8 to 10 years ago. Well, you're only now really seeing AI making real tracks, right? Cyber has been a problem, but they're only getting smarter too. I'm sure you work in the world of IT. You see that,
Yes.
these threat actors get better and better. They get smarter and smarter, and so the threat continues as the sophistication goes up, right? Blockchain, did have a big bang, but it sort of maybe petered out a little bit in terms of, whether it's an everyday conversation. And then today we see new trends coming up, right? Like quantum computing. We see robotics, humanoids, these are, coupled with AI, these trends are getting a bit of a boost as well. So for me working in the field of technology, this is a constant that I try to look beyond. And again, with it's always taken on from a talent lens and a people lens, right? So as you look at these new technologies, who is equipped to handle them, right? And of course, most of them lead with a technical first mindset, because as these are newer trends, you have to be technically very proficient. But I think at the foundational level, the whole ethics and governance is also very important. How do you use AI? How do you use it ethically? How do you create governance around it? And sometimes, because of my background in the law, I think the law is sometimes behind, these technologies, right? The technologies are running ahead, and we're all using AI for every conceivable thing. Well, what about privacy laws? What about, how do you use these AI tools without the risk of, again, running into exposing your company to more cyber threats, right? And there's so many, I mean, all these fakes that are happening, the deep fakes, there's so many issues that come with technology that I think as a leader in your company, in your respective companies, you have to be mindful, as a user or a creator of these tools and these technologies, that there's always has to be an ethical consideration that runs through all of it. There has to be compliance, there has to be governance that sort of shapes these topics, right? So people are not just kind of running amok using these tools. And I'm sure Jamie smiles because I know your background in what you do. You probably see that, right? Every day.
Yes, absolutely see what you are saying in terms of, the governance trying to catch up with the
Mhm.
availability of the tools, and it's a constant challenge. And um, I think, but what I really think when I was listening to you talk is that it all comes back to people. We technology enables us, it gives us the power to do more faster. But no matter what, it always comes back to people in terms of the organizations. And even when you talk about ethics, to me, that's okay. The concern for people and what's right for the people who are using it, the people who are being impacted by the technology or the services that we deliver with it. So, and I think that's important, because sometimes, I mean, technology is great, but sometimes we get so caught up in it and forget that it exists to serve people.
That's exactly right, right. And to your point, the leaders are so important because as they go through this, as they go through these new technologies, it can be very threatening to people who feel like they might be disintermediated, right? It can be very scary if you didn't know how to use it or you used it wrongly. And so having good leaders that have a very strong value system is really important. We see a lot of leaders, no, I won't name names, but who do this for financial gains, right? They are less concerned about some of the ethical impact and and constraints that happen with some of the use of this technology. So for me, when I evaluate these leaders, all the more important for me to feel that we're assessing leaders who have those really solid foundations and values, because surely the bad actors and the good actors, they're all technically brilliant, right? And we see that, and but you want your good actors to sort of win at the end of the day. And what makes the difference is the fact that they have a good value system. And even if the laws haven't caught up with it, they are building products that already safeguard, a lot of, you know, what people should be concerned about, what their teams are concerned about, what the communities that use these tools are concerned about, versus just, putting it out there. And, unfortunately, again, the bad actors get a hold of it and they create a lot of havoc, right? So I think, again, just being mindful that leadership with purpose, leadership of authenticity and highly ethical leadership now becomes, I think, in our generation, even more important.
So that's Amazing. And I agree. I'm smiling because I see, like, from my experience, I've seen great examples of where, the leaders have this and where they don't, and the impact that it has on the team morale, the work environment, the culture, and it's long-term impacts, right? It's not just this year, but even beyond, when that leader moves on, it continues. And I think what you were talking about there actually kind of leads into my next question, which is, with the demand for this high level of world-class leadership, what's the single most critical characteristic that you look for when assessing a leader's potential for the long-term and meaningful impact? I heard you speak to this with the value system
Mhm.
and leadership with purpose, but I'm wondering, in your role, as a, executive, and finding talent, but also as coaching as a leader, like, how do you assess this? Is it through conversations, or um it's not on the
Difficult.
resume, as you said?
Yeah, it's difficult, right? Yeah, because we interview, let's say, executives. So there's an element of speaking, to them during these interviews, and really getting at how they do it, versus not just the what they did, but the how they did it. And when you go through an interview, and I'm sure the folks on this call, if you're thinking of a new role, whether it's in an internal promotion or an outside role, you may have to go through an interview. In these interviews, it's not just about telling the other side or the other interviewer what you've accomplished, but what more important is, I'm going to ask you, how did you do it? And the how will indicate the type of leader or person you are, really. If I speak to Jamie and the only thing she says is, well, I did this, or I made this whole program, or I developed this, cutting edge technology and tool, I'm going to say, well, that's a person who thinks just about the I. If Jamie says, well, my team and we developed this together, or I got the input from my peers, and there was a cross-functional team that I put together. Well, that shows a person that's much more inclusive in their leadership style, right? They are listening for input. Yes, they make the decisions at the end of the day, but it's not on their own. And how they describe the how tells me what kind of leaders they are. And how, let's say, for example, they describe how they work during a crisis. It tells me how they think through a crisis. And if they tell me they develop these policies, then you kind of ask the next question. So that's one level of being able to understand the how. And the other thing we do at Korn Ferry is that we do testing, psychometrics testing. So this gets to your traits, your drivers, what motivates you. And sometimes these things don't come out in an interview, but these testing methodologies actually get at that next level of what kind of person you are. We can test out potential. We can test out learning agility. So there's a lot of things that we can do in those testing methodologies as well that accompanies the interview. And then last but not least, what is really important too is the proof is in the pudding, right? And we do 360s. Because just because you said you did it, I'm going to say, well, let's test that out. Who did you work with, right? If your team member says, boy, working with Selena was really a hellacious moment, then that's not good, right? So, the 360s will bring together the unveiling of the person as they are perceived by the people they work with and for, either their current roles or their previous roles. So referencing is very important. So, so that's kind of how we shape, look and shape leaders.
That is a really good nugget for all of us, because I think most of us here in the audience are probably not on our last role. At some point, we'll be looking for another one, and those are really great insights that to reinforce, because I think sometimes the focus is so much on the what, like metrics, and not the how, and that's really important. We have a lot of questions coming in the chat. I have more questions for you too around mentorship, but Um,
Let's
I
take some
want to give
questions
the
from the
audience a
chat. Yeah.
chance. Is that
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Yes, absolutely. Why don't you read out the questions? Because I'm
Okay.
not seeing. Yeah.
Yes, I can do that. And Elaine, before I can read your question, but I want to give you an opportunity to come off mute if you'd like to ask for yourself.
You're on mute.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
You mentioned authenticity. Is having a passion outside of work a way to demonstrate that, or do you think that gets overrated? Could it actually be a distraction depending on who you are talking to from those work-related areas that you were discussing? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, it's a balance. I would say that let's say if you're passionate about Unveiled, right? I think it's something that if you want to discuss it in the workplace or with your boss or your mentor or even your team to encourage them to be part of this community, I think that's very appropriate, because it has a correlation in that sense, right? But if let's say your passion is like completely, has nothing to do with the workplace. Let's say you love to do marathons, but boy, you've got to practice like 4 days, 3 hours a day every day. You have to be judicious, right? About sharing how much time you're investing in a passion like that, because some people could take it wrongly and says, well, where does she find 3 hours in her day to run? Is that taking it out of my work day? And especially in the days of now hybrid remote work, there's a lot of mistrust that bosses have, right? Like, okay, they're working from home, but are they doing their laundry? And she's telling me she's a marathon runner preparing for the Boston Marathon. Is she really putting a full day work? So those questions do end up, like it or not, people are human. They start questioning. So I think you want to be judicious in sharing your passions, but certainly you want to be authentic. You don't want to not tell anybody you run as well, but maybe you don't need to share exactly the schedule or how you go about it. you know?
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Elaine. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Selena, in terms of the mistrust and the remote
Mhm.
work experience. I mean, it needs to be acknowledged. And whether it's right or wrong, it's acknowledging it and then confronting it. And so that's really helpful. And I know as a mentor, um, it's very different than it was, let's say, 20 years ago when everybody was expected to be in the office. But you've been a mentor, Selena, over all the long run of all these different changes and technology and how we work or where we work. And I think probably the heart of that hasn't really changed. Um, so for you, and you've been very passionate about mentoring leaders, what's the most significant challenge that emerging leaders face today, things that you've helped them with or that you believe executive mentorship can uniquely help professionals?
I think, mentoring, and I've been very grateful to be able to help at all levels to a very junior entry level, let's say team member, all the way to an executive C-suite member. And, those are actually, things that make me passionate about, the subject of mentorship and sponsorship, which is the other sort of way of looking at, especially in the workplace. I think that as you grow in your career, it's very, very important to have good mentorship and sponsorship around you. I think when you're starting off your career, it's more about the performance aspect, right? Like, okay, if I do a good job, I'm going to get a promotion. And in most cases, that is the fact, right? Let's say in the first 10 years of your career, just keep your head down, perform well, be a good colleague, and you get your promotions. But at a certain point in as you climb up this corporate ladder, what you realize is performance becomes table stakes. What are the other factors that make it important? Right? You need to understand the corporate environment that you are operating in. Politics comes into play. relationships need to be built. So as you go up and knowing what are the opportunities that are available, you can't just keep your head down, right? Because in order for you to continue to grow, you need to grow yourself. So having a sponsor or a mentor is very important because they help you identify those opportunities. They help you realize what is important in the organization. They also help you, against making those missteps, right? Like if they tell you, hey, in this organization, it's really not a good idea to do A, B, and C because that's not seen in good light. Well, it helps you from making those missteps. So I think mentors and sponsors help accelerate your growth because they minimize some of the missteps that you might make inadvertently, not like you're out there trying to sabotage yourself, but even going into a new job in a new company, people tend to make those missteps because they don't understand how that culture works, right? So I think it's really important to surround yourself with good mentors. And sometimes it doesn't have to be official. It could just be the person in your office who's, very willing to share, and I think those are the best, right? Like you develop good relationships with your peers who can really help guide you through things. But at the same time, I would encourage you that you should do the same for them. So it's not just a one-way mentoring traffic, it's sort of a two-way. And even as I speak to other folks who are mentors, they love hearing back from their mentees as to what they as managers are not doing right. So sometimes sharing your voice as to the concerns of the people within your category is really helpful to your mentors. So I think don't view it as just a one-way relationship. It's a gift to give and to receive constructive feedback both ways.
To me, that is extremely powerful. And I know we had another question or really a comment from Elaine in the chat about how critical sponsorship is for success. But from my experience as well, that two-way relationship, that's what to me, that's almost where what makes sponsorship maybe a little bit different from mentorship is that I feel like it's more emphasized that two-way, because that, it's like you're showing the sponsor that you're bringing value to them too. That gives them the motivation to speak on your behalf and advocate for you. Because like you said, we're human. So even though we want to do it out of the goodness of our heart, we're investing ourselves, our reputation, our time. So that one I think is so important and it's also something that Sahana's really brought up in the materials on sponsorship is that two-way relationship. So I really appreciate that. And another question for you, and this could be an example from either your own personal experience or from someone you've mentored, but as you mentioned, there's this potential for missteps, and some of us get so fearful about making missteps that we're not willing to take risk or do things differently that could be key to actually growing our career. So, maybe stepping away from the traditional idea of what success is or the traditional path. Can you share an example or a story about that?
Yeah, no, I think that that is very powerful. I think what I'd love for all of us to be able to embrace is that we have to have courage. Courage is another thing that we measure in our assessment methodologies and how we interview for, and courage is something that you know again gives the possibility to the what you may have thought was impossible. And I like to share this example with you of a very, very senior executive, and by all accounts one would look at him and say this guy has made it in his category, where he was in the organization. But we had a very, very long chat once over lunch, and he was just asking me like, hey, what do you think I should do next? He wanted to go into a bigger organization and with more complexity, and that's sort of the normal linear path, right? But I said, but let's talk about what you're passionate about. What if I said that, there's an alternative path that you could take? What would you do? He's like, well, I have all these great ideas, especially with AI coming up. I think I can do X. But nah, I don't think I should do it because, I think, going into a bigger company may be more interesting and etc. And I really challenged him and I said, look, I think you really should go with your passion. I said, what is there to lose, right? I mean, you could start something up and if it's not successful, I could quickly put you back into a company. It's not a big deal. And I left him with that thought, and he's like, okay, and I thought nothing of it. But just to reel the story forward, it's now been 4 years, 4.5 years since he started up his own company. And, just last week, he raised another $1 billion. And so this has been a great success. And he's on his board are the who's who in the industry. And, and it was a real treat when I met him last week at a industry summit when he said that this company would not have existed if I didn't have that lunch conversation with you, where you really challenged me to go out of my comfort zone and to really have the courage to do something different. So I think, it's a story that, obviously resonates hopefully with all of us, that at whatever levels you think you're at, just be courageous, right? And I even share my own story where I pivoted after 20 years of practicing the law, and I felt, I was at the top of my game. I was doing really well, and and I did something completely different and went into executive recruiting and talent advisory. And I went in as the most junior person in the company. And to do that, I mean, I think in a way, I guess it took a lot of courage, to make that pivot, not knowing if I was going to be successful. But again, I told myself, like, what can be the worst case scenario? If I really hated it after a year, or I felt like I'm really not going to be good at this, I'm always going to have my law degree and my experience to fall back on, and I could be a lawyer again, And the truth is, I really enjoy doing what I do. I've now been doing this for 15 years, and I could, even till last week, one of my clients asked me if I would just go and take this senior legal role that they have, and I said I think I'm way past that. But what it tells you is that what you've done in the past, you always still have it. So if you feel like you need a safety net before you do something courageous, then look at it in that light, right? Give yourself a chance that even if you fail, you still have all of that behind you. It's not, it's not like if you fail in this new endeavor, that's the end of you, right? And failure should not again be seen as failure as well. It's frankly, living without regrets, I think, is more important to me than looking at things like that as, well, I'm not going to do it because I don't want to fail. But what about thinking about it as, I'm going to do it because I'm going to not live with a regret that I should have done it or I should have tried it, I think that's a better way of thinking about it than being worried about failure.
I love that. That's a great takeaway for all of us. And I see Elaine has her hand up.
Yeah, I don't want to appear to hog all the questions, but Selena, we hear the term a lot, imposter syndrome, and almost universally, I have heard it with respect to women. And not to say that that's true, that's just been my observation. And I wanted to know your thoughts on that, is whether you think there is an actual imposter syndrome, or is it just being human? When you go in any situation, you might be nervous. That means it's meaningful. It doesn't mean necessarily I'm faking it. It means I'm feeling those human emotions, but I still have to show up leaning in and confident. Like, do you think there's any such thing as imposter syndrome? And do you agree it usually is discussed in relation to women? And why, if that's the case?
Well, let's just say I guess personally I would say that I rather not believe in this imposter syndrome. I think I agree more with your comments that let's say if you're promoted into a new role or you happen to, be offered a new job in this role or whatever it is, or you're given a new task and that maybe you don't have that much experience in, but your boss has said, this is what we need you to go lead. Well, the reason why those things happen is because whoever gave you that new project role or whatnot believed that you could do it. So, I don't think that you're kind of, and sometimes people say, well, fake it till you make it, right? As well as, the imposter syndrome. And sometimes you do have to go in with a bit of trepidation because you don't have all the tools in the toolkit to solve this problem perfectly. But believe in the fact that whoever gave you that task, believe that you did have the capability to either do it or build into it, right? And develop into it. So, and if you have, I think what is more important is to be able to demonstrate some vulnerability to say, hey, I've not done this project or I've not solved this problem before, but I'd love to get your input and please, help me learn through this process, right? So be vulnerable to share that you're open to feedback and learning in the journey to solving this problem or being in this role versus, I think you'd be a real imposter if you pretended you knew it all and came across that way and then lo and behold, let's say someone outs you and like that you don't want that to happen. I mean, most of us are not 100% equipped to do the job that we're going into anyway, right? Especially if it's a promotion or it's a stretch assignment. Those are things that someone, your manager or your boss, saw in you that potential to go into that role. And I think don't feel like you're an imposter. Actually, embrace the challenge and use the tools and the people around you to help you be successful in that new role.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for that question, Elaine. We have one in the chat from Sahana, and it says, Selena, your work in executive search and board advisory gives you a unique view of how sponsorship shapes opportunity. What have you observed about themes or trends around who gets sponsored for opportunities? It's a tough
Okay,
one.
well, it is a tough one. I mean, it's I mean, my sense is that, I'm not part of these organizations. I hear these organizations my clients, they work on mentorship, sponsorship, sort of programs. Some companies do it very deliberately. To be successful in these programs, it has to be a sustainable long-term investment. It cannot be a one-off blip investment and then, and then they're gone, right? But I would encourage the folks here on this call that even if your company does not have these programs, that you can seek out a sponsor yourself, right? And you can within your workplace, you know, identify that person that you can build that trusting relationship with, right? Because sometimes, it has to work both ways again, that the sponsor does, it is someone that you feel a bond and a trust with, and they want to help, they want to be helpful, so you can approach them and say, hey, this is informal, but I'd really like to get you, to be one of my sort of your informal board of directors, like, and if you reach out to someone who you've observed in your workplace where you see them doing that with other people and you like the way they are as leaders, approach them to be your mentor or your sponsor in an informal way, right? Because the programmatic ones are actually more directive, and sometimes they don't even work because there's no chemistry. So my sense is really to try and identify people that you have a strong respect for and chemistry with, and those make the best sponsors and mentors.
Thank you. I feel like that's going to be a clip that we will be resharing very often for future participants in the Unveiled programs. I have one more question. Mine is around the and when we shared this, we were inviting each person to rethink what success really means for them. So with that, Selena, I was wondering, and it's you've already given us so much advice. I really like that last one about identifying and approaching sponsors. You've talked about courage and challenging ourselves. But is there anything else that you would share with us in terms of how we can rethink what success really means and build that our own purpose-driven legacy, like starting now and going forward?
I think it's, I think you guys, by virtue of the fact that you're part of Unveil already tells me that this is an important purpose for you. I would just encourage you to sort of practice it every day, right? Make it your own mantra and mindset. And, and every one of you on this call, 100% I know have something to give, to the people around you, be it a colleague, a team member, I mean, even your family members, friends who are going through transitions, who are, needing advice, right? And make that sort of an everyday part of your life. And I try to practice that because it doesn't have to be anything specific. When I'm speaking to an executive, they may be asking me for advice right there and then, and I'm hopefully, being able to share my experience and what could be helpful to them. And likewise, I could be sharing that with a very young team member or someone very senior. So I encourage you that all of us have valuable experiences and feedback that we can share. As long as you make that part of your daily pay it forward mindset, that you can always help someone. And frankly, it could even be the checkout person at the grocery store. It's really interesting how these conversations sometimes happen, even with people that you least expect. But making those moments, sort of mindful, I think is how you create that purpose-driven approach to everything you do, and I think you guys are probably one of the best ambassadors to do that. And if you do that for someone in your team that's younger than you, or automatically your boss is going to observe that and go, oh my gosh, look at Elaine, look at Jamie. They are folks who really care about that next generation or how their peers are faring, and then they might offer to be your mentor. So I think it's sort of that circle of life. And if you do that to others and give and receive feedback and you help people, it becomes that flywheel that is, going to be more and more, I would say, just effective, right, in your lifetime. So.
Thanks, Selena. This has been such a great fireside chat. For me personally, I feel inspired and feel that call to action to make it an everyday practice, to have courage and to look for those opportunities to help others, and this will truly benefit us in that whole circle of life that you mentioned. So this has just been a really great session, and I'm so glad that you could all join. Thank you for your comments and your questions. Any last closing comments, Selena?
No, thank you, and all the very best in Unveil. I'll be following you guys and wishing you lots of success in what you do.
Thank you, Selena. We appreciate your
Take care.
time. Have a great day,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.